We're now going to turn to the rest of the panel, which I'm sure will be part of a very interesting discussion that we'll be having here today. As I mentioned earlier, the increase in violent right-wing extremist activities across the world is concerning, and so is its increased globalized nature. Manifestos are being shared across countries and continents, foreign fighters are drawn to conflict zones, and attacks are being live-streamed and steeped into online violent right-wing extremist culture. And I really hope, and I am sure that in our discussion today, we will delve a little deeper into these issues. We will get a real feel and understanding of what this looks like up front, and hopefully a better understanding and humanity as part of our responses. So having said all that, I'm going to move to our first speaker as part of the panel, Ms. Deeyah Khan, a two-time Emmy Award-winning and twice BAFTA-nominated documentary film director, whose documentary will be screening later today. Hailing from Norway, she's known for working to create intercultural dialogue and understanding by confronting the world's most complex and controversial topics. Deeyah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here, and thank you to so much. I'm almost a little bit lost for words now because I feel like you've both covered everything that needs to be understood. But yes, as you know, my name is Deeyah. I'm the daughter of immigrants. I was born and raised in Oslo, Norway. My father comes from Pakistan. My mother is Afghan. I'm a Muslim. I'm a woman of color, as you can see. And all these identities, all these experiences that I've grown up with have been a tremendous source of conflict in my life, in my early childhood. Because I grew up with a lot of racism as a child, I always felt like I was this strange, brown, ugly little person in the sea of blonde and blue-eyed people. But beyond my own sort of feelings of insecurity and inadequacies like that, I also grew up with neo-Nazis marching in the streets of Oslo and chasing and beating up my brother, his friends. One of my brother's friends was actually murdered many years ago. So this is a problem. Right-wing extremism and white supremacy in general is a problem that we are speaking about in a room like this today, but it is not something that has escaped people like me. So the foundations of this and the expressions of this movement has been there for a very long time and has affected people who look like me and our parents who came to these countries for a very, very long time, but it was never taken as seriously as it's being taken today. So I'm very grateful that we're having this event and that we're willing to excavate the real nature of what this is, why this is, and how we engage with it. Now, growing up like that, I very quickly became an anti-racist campaigner. I remember skipping school several times, going on anti-fascist marches. My earliest memory of an anti-fascist march was when I was about 6 years old, and you'll see this mentioned in the film as well, where I held my father's hand and went to a counter-racist rally. And I tried everything. I was really angry at people like that. I was aggressive towards people like that. I threw things at them. I shouted at them. I flipped them off. I mean, everything you can imagine, I did. And it made me feel very good at the time because I thought, well, I'm really making some sort of progress because I'm letting them know that what they believe and what they feel is unacceptable. And I'm showing them what my feelings are. And I was very comfortable in my sort of self-righteous condemnation of behavior like that. I have to say it didn't particularly provide any results other than me patting myself on the back for having all the right opinions, all the correct friends and politics and all of that, but really nothing else shifted. The problem of racism, the problem of right-wing extremism sat there, festered, and has grown and spread to the beast that it's become today. A few years ago, I ended up doing an interview with the BBC where we were speaking about multiculturalism and diversity and our diverse societies and what that should look like, can look like in the future. And I defended that. I defended our plural society. I defended the need to create a future where we all belong, where people who look like me and people who look like you have a place and a stake in our future, and for our children to be able to participate in that future. I thought that was a fairly bland interview to give. I didn't think that what I'm saying is particularly interesting or that exciting. That interview ended up going viral, and several violent racist websites ended up posting clips from that interview and launched active campaigns against me. So the result of that is that I was inundated with death threats from white supremacists from all around the world. And in these threats, it was detailed descriptions of how I was going to be raped, how I was going to be cut open, how they needed to ensure that people like me could not have any children, and then ultimately all the various ways that I was going to be skinned alive and hung and tortured and eventually killed. And I remember thinking at the time, okay, I have a choice now. This is presenting me with a choice. I can do what these threats are designed to do, which is to become afraid and to hide and to try and avoid any kind of engagement with this, or I can decide to confront this and really delve into this. And at the time, the decision that I made was that I refuse to behave in a way that they want me to behave. I refuse to act in a way that they are designing. And fear is the purpose of this. Fear and division and hatred, mutual hatred, is the purpose of what they're trying to elicit. And I refuse to engage in that. So instead, I thought, okay, let me see, is it possible for somebody like me to sit down with somebody like that, face to face, human being to human being, and see if it's possible for them to potentially recognize my humanity and for me to recognize theirs. Is it possible to hate face to face, up close and personal like that? So I set out on a mission to try and find some of these people, and as you would imagine, it proved very, very difficult. Most people absolutely, were not interested in sitting with somebody like me. Eventually, after months and months of nagging and pushing, some of them started saying, okay, yes. One guy started, and he's the leader of the largest neo-Nazi organization in this country. And he said, look, you've got 1 hour, you come to this specific motel that I've chosen, and after that 1 hour, you need to just disappear. I never want to see you again, want to have nothing to do with you ever again. And I said, okay, that's fine, no problem. And I remember, showing, and I was really excited. I was just, finally, I'm going to get to talk to somebody like this, and maybe I can understand something about them. And I remember sitting in this motel room, suddenly everything starts, all the sensible stuff starts coming to your mind going, what are you doing? What if he comes armed? What if he's got people with him? What if? He turns up at the door, and he honored exactly what he said. He came alone, and he sat down, and I was really nervous and really afraid, because this is the first time I'm sitting down with somebody like that. Somebody I've been afraid of my whole life, somebody I've considered to be a monster, or representing the monster in my mind, is suddenly sitting in front of me. And we talk for 1 hour, we talk for 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours later. He says, we are going to this rally that's going to happen, and you're welcome to come film with us, and in fact you're welcome to come film with us for however long that you want to. And I remember asking him, why is this suddenly okay? Why from 1 hour you have to disappear to you can come along now? And he said, no one's ever asked me the questions that you asked me. He said, I've done so many interviews, and he said, and I said also, why did you say yes to me? Why even give me an hour? And he said, because I will benefit from being in a film or being on TV, is what he was really upfront and honest about this, which I quite respect. He said, if you did really well in this engagement between us, I come away as the winner, because I can proclaim to be the victim, and that the entire system is against men like us, and so I win this encounter. If I sort of dominate you in this encounter, I still win, because I made this brown woman, come across really badly. And he said, neither one of those outcomes happened. He said, something else happened. He said, you actually talked to me about my life, and you also shared with me something about your life. And he said, you've made me see what some of your feelings and experiences might be like. Because some of the conversations that we were having is, what it felt like to be me and what the consequences of his kind of rhetoric and actions does to somebody like me. And that's something he's not used to. What he was used to is somebody walking into a room with him, shouting at him, trying to argue with him, trying to throw facts and statistics at him, which they don't care about. That's completely irrelevant. For him, the human cost of what he's doing is something that was hard for him to reconcile. Most of these guys, despite what we think, in all of our minds, we're all the good guy. We're all the hero of our own story. And these guys are no different. In their mind, they're not thinking, I'm an evil, horrible, whatever guy. They're thinking, I'm the good guy in this. And so him realizing that his actions are causing this kind of pain for somebody else was a difficult thing for him to reconcile face to face. At a distance, he doesn't care. It's easy for him to disconnect. But face to face, looking at me, it was hard for him. And I would even use really awful words about myself that were included in these threats. I read him the threats, and he found that awkward and hard. Anyway, I ended up spending several months with him and also other members of his group and other groups as well. Some of the experiences that I had is I had people pull guns on me, telling me that people like me don't deserve to exist, and I was actually pregnant at the time, and they didn't know this. But one of the men, I remember walking up to me and blowing smoke in my face. And he had a gun in his hand and a bottle of beer in the other. And he said, "Are you pregnant?" And I remember having to look him dead in the eye and saying, "No, I am not." Because they all kept talking. I would keep overhearing conversations about how women like me should be sterilized, how dark people should not get to have any children, and that we should all be, our offspring should be exterminated, that that's the only way to control our population. So that's the kind of experiences that I had. But the other kinds of experiences that I had, those are the types of conversations and actions that they took against me when they were in groups. Whenever we would sit down, something else would happen. And what I learned from that is that what these guys have done is they've given up on us. They don't expect any of us to care about them. They don't expect any of us to truly engage with them. And we can talk about this a little bit later, but I would just like to bring in, I've worked on violent extremism for the last 6 years or so, and this is the second film that I've done. The first film that I did was about jihadis. It was about why young Muslim men, born and raised like me in Western countries, are going to foreign battlefields and fighting these fights. And what's really interesting to me and I've also received death threats from that side, most of my life, because I'm a woman and I speak about human rights. What's interesting to me is that the death threats that I received were pretty much exactly the same. And I remember even saying to my friend, it's the same guy. It might as well be the same guy. And making these films, what I came to realize is that what these movements are providing for our young people is what you were saying as well, is it's a sense of belonging, it's a sense of purpose, it's a sense of community, it's a sense of meaning and glory and brotherhood. And someone who feels invisible is suddenly seen. Somebody who feels powerless suddenly feels powerful. And there's something very intoxicating in that, but also something very telling in that about the rest of us. Why is it that extremist groups can actively provide that for our young people and somehow the rest of society cannot? There's other factors that I also learned about these men, which is mental health is a hugely significant and under-diagnosed viewpoint when it comes to these young men. I think a sense of insignificance and insecurity that they carry with them, not understanding how to be a human being and how to be a man in particular in a very fast-changing world. How to find their own place in the society where they can feel dignified. And what all of this tells me is that as much as everybody would like to say that this is all about ideology, whichever form of extremism that you're looking at, I think ideology is absolutely a part of it. But underneath, if you really dig and you really look, the psychological and the social and the emotional aspects of this, the truth of it is that there are basic human needs that are not being met. And again, that says something more about us as a society than it does about these men. And I'm not saying that we should justify or accept any of their actions. All I am saying is that we need to understand why these guys do the things that they do so that we can become more effective in countering and preventing these types of events from happening. And the biggest antidote to hate, as you were just so beautifully saying, it is connection. It is refusing to become like them. And the reason I say that is that it's not so much that it's their humanity at stake. It's actually our own. We have to make a decision about how we want to live and how we want to actually address these issues. And just as fear is contagious, so is hope. And I think empathy, understanding, and human connection, and refusing to become divided and hateful and afraid of each other is what we need to do, and to really truly celebrate our plural societies. I have a lot more to say, but I'm going to leave it for a little bit later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Deeyah, for your very, very powerful words. And let me tell you, this doesn't happen often here. So that's a very good indication of, I think, the very powerful words and experiences that you've shared with us today. And we'll see more of that in more detail and visually very affecting detail in the documentary.